Keith's office and Ron. I'm Steve Gelbs, and this is as perfect as it gets. Is it not, guys?
I have a feeling that this show is going to have an emphasis on beyond.
I'm just wondering what the grandpa tricycle is all about. I mean, we've got to get the story about that, right? Don't you have to be over 80 to drive the grandpa tricycle?
At some point, hopefully Keith will rejoin us and we can get that answer. Until that time, he's walking the dog right now, FYI. About 10 minutes ago, he said, I have 10 minutes, right? I'm going to go walk the dog. We all knew this is probably where this was going to land. So as we await for Keith to join us, let me say that Beyond the Booth Live is brought to you by Citi. Citi knows the frontline workers keeping New York City running deserve to get where they need to go safely and reliably. That's why Citi is working with Lyft to give a free annual Citi Bike membership to eligible critical workers in New York City. Learn more at citybikenyc.com/hero bikes. That was a long read. And still
a little ironic you're talking about bikes, as we just the last time I saw Keith's bike, Auntie M was on it. I mean, look at that thing.
Oh boy.
Looks like Keith could have used that tricycle to get back here for the start of this show.
I mean, clearly we are in mid-season form here.
That's right.
Should we go? And just whenever he joins. Okay, so let's start with the news of the week since we last spoke last week. We don't know a lot still about what's going to happen with this Major League Baseball season, but we do know that Major League Baseball sent a 67-page proposal to the MLBPA about health and safety protocols for getting a season up and running. It was very in-depth. We know it has to be. Gary, from what you gathered reading the highlights of that proposal, what were your initial thoughts?
Well, as we speak, my understanding is the Players Association is formulating their response. Hi, Keith. Thanks for joining us. Nice to. Oh, Jay's book. I read that last night, by the way. It's fantastic.
Is it good?
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Jay Horwitz, new book, Mr. Met. Yeah.
In one sitting, you read that, Gary?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It took about 4 hours, 5 hours, maybe. Yeah.
Nice.
A lot of good stories, a lot of Jay-isms. I found something about Jay I had never known before, so it was cool. Really cool. Yeah.
Was there a lot of stuttering?
No, it all came out very smoothly in print.
Keith, just so you know, we are live, and you've entered the chat about 5 minutes late. What are you eating? What are you eating?
A little bit of salami and some cheese.
Keith, I just told everybody that we're in mid-season form, and clearly that's the case. Everything go okay with the dog outside?
Oh yeah, he won't bother me now. Haji might bother me. Haji's getting hungry, but he can wait.
Keith, can we get the backstory of the bicycle in the background, the tricycle in the background?
Oh, you don't want to hear that.
Hey, Keith, I know you're
money.
Keith, I know you're quarantined in Florida as I am. Are you having a hailstorm? Because I am.
No, but it went by here.
Oh, an unbelievable hailstorm.
Yeah, so it's up to you. It's up where you're at now.
Okay.
Crazy. That is a bike that someone else was bought for, and it has never been used.
I was saying earlier, Keith. Normally, the old man tricycle doesn't come into play till you're like 80 years old. So I think you're not at that point yet.
No.
Well, Keith, anyway, just to catch up, we're talking about the MLB proposal, the 67-page safety proposal. Gary, go on.
Okay, so apparently the Players Association is formulating their response to the owners' health protocols today. So we'll see what comes of that. I know they had a conference call with about 100 players for about 3.5 hours. What struck me is that it's very comprehensive. A lot of things that might be seen as over the top, the idea of not showering at the ballpark, no hydrotherapy, and all those things. I think those might get adjusted along the way. But the thing that struck me the most, and I know other people have responded the same way, is that they are not talking about daily testing for players. And in a protocol where players are not in a bubble like they were talking about at first in Arizona or Florida, but are going home to their families and their families are doing whatever they're doing, I think the only way to keep the cadre of players and support personnel safe is to test everybody who is going to be in that stadium every day. And it does not appear as though they plan to do that. They're talking about multiple times per week. But, you know, if somebody comes in positive and you don't know it for a couple of days, he has a chance to spread it to a lot of other people, and then you get into a big problem. So I wonder whether that's going to be an adjustment as well.
Yeah, I'm with Gary. I think if the Arizona plan had been used, where players were in quarantined away from their families, maybe that could have worked. But if they're not going to be, I think they have to be tested every day, because what you're trying to do is not only identify who's sick, but also get them out of the locker room, get them out of the mix. But we'll see what they're going to do.
And I believe
it was a little blurb in the Post last week where Germany had opened up their soccer league, and it was just one of those little blurbs. And I thought it should have been a much bigger story, but their second division, one of their teams, I don't know what town, what city, but a handful of their players got coronavirus, and they had to shut it down.
Right. And they're talking about in the proposals that MLB made that if somebody tests positive, they pull him out, but they don't quarantine the people he's come in contact with. So, that's something that you have to be concerned about as well. I think you're trying to thread needles here. You're trying to do something that's never been done before. And, there are going to be a lot of nuances to what they finally come up with when the players respond and they work it out. But you just hope that it holds whatever the final plan is, and that you don't get big outbreaks, because otherwise it's going to put a major monkey wrench into the hope to have an 82 game season.
And Gary, I know that you mentioned the MLBPA expected to make a counter proposal, respond to that proposal. And we are taping this show. If you're watching us live on Facebook on Thursday afternoon, obviously you might be watching us on TV on Friday evening as well. But as we speak, Evan Drellick of The Athletic is reporting that the MLBPA has delivered its response, and it includes notes on testing frequency. So to your point right there, protocols for positive tests, in-stadium medical personnel, protections for high-risk players and family, access to pre-post-game therapies, and sanitation protocols. So,
the other thing that's been noted is that there was nothing in there about what happens when a player tests positive on the road. Does he quarantine in a hotel at that point? Do they have a place in each city where they can quarantine safely? Do they get sent home? How does that work? So that's going to have to be figured out too.
Yeah, the other question that I would have, and then we'll move on to some of the fun stuff, but you guys talk about the testing frequency. And I mean, Mike Trout came out and said that if players aren't being tested every day, he doesn't see a path to come back. Right now, I believe that the testing turnaround time would be a full 24 hours. When you look at this and say, okay, they need to test people every day, does it need to be rapid testing as well in your mind with immediate results?
Well, the problem is that the rapid testing has proven to be not as efficacious as the 24-hour testing. So if they can get the rapid testing to the point where it's, reliable enough, that would be great. But it doesn't appear that most of the rapid testing, the Abbott testing procedures have gotten to that point yet.
And Mike Trout's wife, I believe, is pregnant, and that's a common occurrence for players in the major leagues. And I'm sure they're as frightened as anyone about the not knowing whether they have it or not.
So let's transition now, like I said, to some of the fun stuff. Every week we talk about what SNY is airing right now and these old games. And right now we're right in the midst of that 1986 World Series against the Boston Red Sox. This Saturday, I know that this is now out there, but this has been in the works for a little while now. Something really exciting. Game 6 of the World Series will air at 6 p.m. on SNY. At the exact same time on Facebook, on SNY's Facebook page, we will have a Game 6 watch party presented by Citi where Ron, Keith, Doc, Daryl, plenty more, a bunch of the guys are going to be Zooming alongside each other. And essentially we'll be sitting back watching Game 6 with the players who lived it. it's one of the most exciting things that I've ever been a part of. And I just wonder right off the bat, Keith, Ron, how excited are you to sit back and watch that game again with your guys?
Go ahead, Keith.
I'm real excited because, ball players, they scatter when the season's over. And when you retire, you got guys here, there, everywhere, and you don't stay in touch. And when you celebrate the World Series, the season's over. When that night of celebration is over and everybody gets in their cars and goes on home, or you don't see anybody until the parade, but it's all till next spring training. You never really have a chance to really get together as a group. And I understand it's going to be around 15, 16 people, players.
That's the plan right now.
Which is, to me, I'm looking forward to it very much, to get opinions of my teammates as we watch the game progress. I think it's a terrific idea. I think it's the best idea to come down the pike during this whole coronavirus postponement of the season. I think it's wonderful.
I'm thinking that what's great about it, two things for me, is that all the players have their own, their own relevant history on what they remember from that game 6. Everyone was in different places and thinking different things. So I think all the fans and us as players will be able to hear what each other were thinking during that process. And second and most important, I don't know, I've never watched game 6. Have you watched game 6, Keith? I've never watched it from beginning to end. This will be the first time I've ever watched it.
I haven't seen those games in decades. So, and I mean, Russ Welkin, our stage manager, texted me last night because he was watching, and he was talking about the rundown play when Carter and I got hung up when we were on second and third, and how Boston totally botched that rundown. I totally forgot where the ball was hit initially. I mean, it was a contact play for me. I'm the lead runner. So I'm in a rundown. I'm trying to get in the rundown long enough to get Carter to third. And I believe it was Ray Knight second. Now, and then for them, I forgot that Boggs had the ball. I'm the guy they got to get out. And then Boggs threw it back to Owens. And then Owens sat there and did a zombie.
Humana.
Safe. Because all of a sudden the bases are loaded. They totally botched that. I had no recollection of the Boggs started that whole mess.
I remember Marty Barrett ended up with the ball and just slammed it in his glove. As it ended up, the bases were loaded.
It's because Owens threw to him at second.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, they got to get me. The hell with everybody else. Get me as fast as you can, so it's first and third. Because Carter's job is to come and run me off the base.
And that's game 3.
I am not going to go back to third base. I'm going to try to score or get in a rundown if they screw up and score. Carter has to advance. I'm getting sacrificed, and you got to, get it long enough to get Ray to second. That should have been their focus, and that was just not good fundies.
And that was game 3, correct? That play was in game 3? Yeah.
Game 3.
So that's, by the way, a nice little preview of what you're going to get, not just with Keith and Ron, but hopefully 15 guys this Saturday. Let's talk about game 4, though, because game 3, much needed victory. You guys couldn't fall behind 3-0 to the Red Sox and expect to win that series. Ron, you pitched game 4, pitched great in game 1. So you're coming off a high there, even though you do get the loss, the 1-0 loss. What were your emotions going into that game 4 start, especially, a Boston kid who is pitching for the first time at Fenway?
Well, first, Bobby O was so good in game 3 for us. It was a game we had to have. I mean, all the games we had to have after getting down 0-2. So, Bobby's was important, but I felt mine was just as important as Bobby's was the night before. You're right. I'm from Massachusetts. I grew up as a Red Sox fan. I had never been on the Fenway Park a field except for that year when we had some kind of charity game. I think that's the first time I'd ever been on it, and this was the second time that first time that I'd ever was going to play on it. And the only thing I remember about that game really is that my warm-up was as bad as any warm-up I've ever had. That's how I guess the nerves that I had. And then I remember I had the bases loaded, I believe, in the first inning. I got Evans to pop up and get out of that inning. It was a very nerve-wracking kind of first inning. And then after that, I kind of cruised. And of course, I think it's more known as the Gary Carter game because he had 2 big home runs in that game. The second one off Steve Crawford, Shag Crawford, as they called him, that went over everything on Lansdowne Street onto the parking garage roof.
Gary, what do you remember about that game?
Well, Ronnie just, he mentioned it. It was that first inning because Ronnie had an interesting night because he pitched 7 scoreless innings, but he walked 6, which I imagine is why I didn't see a pitch count for you. I don't know how many pitches you threw in that game, but I had to think that's why Davey took you out, is because you had walked 6 guys, right?
Yeah, I think he took me out because I walked 6, but also I think I walked 5, but maybe it was 6. But also we had built the lead by then. I think it was 7-1 after 7. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
But that first inning, you walked a couple, and then I think the second inning, Gedman had a leadoff double, and you got out of that, and then you started rolling after that, right?
Yeah, and I remember Mookie made an amazing play because he had been told in left field that if there's a ball off the wall hit and there's a guy on first base, they are not going to score. So occasionally you could throw behind the runner that's on first. He's going to stop at third and try to get the guy at second base. And it was Gedman again, I think, who hit that ball, and Mookie threw him out at second, which was a huge out. I think it ended up being the 2 outs or the end of the inning or whatever, but it was a great play by Mookie.
It was the only guys that went to the stadium on the off day when Davey told us not to come. No workout. All the left fielders had to come to the ballpark, and Darrell Johnson, former manager, or was it the 75 Red Sox?
Yeah.
The World Series lost to the Reds. Well, he had managed in Boston and he knew Fenway, and he took all the left fielders out there, from what I remember Davey telling me, and told him exactly what Ron said. Ball hit hard off the wall. That runner at first is no chance he's going to score if you play it cleanly. And you got a chance to throw the runner out at second base. He's stretching for a double. And that's exactly what happened. And that was one of the big plays in that game.
You know, Keith, you talk about that off day and Davey giving you guys the day off. You certainly weren't a group that lacked any sort of belief in yourself, but when you fall behind 2-0 at home, was there any, I shouldn't even ask, was there any feel? What was the feeling falling behind 2-0 as you awaited going into Game 3 at Fenway?
Well, both teams had extremely emotional and adrenaline draining playoffs. So we were both in the same boat. We had a long flight back home. Boston had to go coast to coast. Sure, we had the off days, but the way we lost in Game 1 was a heartbreaker. And then to get our butts kicked in Game 2, that was a real gut check. And, I remember that my off day there, Rusty was there, and I had never been to Boston. And I'm a national leaguer. I had never stepped foot in Boston in my life. So Rusty took me and a few other guys out to dinner. I forget where, somewhere famous, Ronnie, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And, we just had dinner and had some wine, and I did not stay out late that night and run around. I got my rest, even though it was a night game. But I do think that little respite from the media, 108 wins, it would have been pounded, and I think it did us a lot of good. I was very concerned. We had to win, as we just mentioned. Just I'll add a little caveat here. We had to win 3 and 4. Okay, if we don't win, we win 3 and then we lose 4. They're 3-1. They're sitting there going, okay. But when we won this 4th game and tied the series, that got their attention. That kind of got their attention. I mean, they were a good team. And what really was worrisome for me, and I didn't do anything, was the 2 pitchers. You had Bobby Ojeda, who was a Red Sox, and he's going back to pitch probably the most important game of his life at Fenway, where he came from. And then you had Ron, who grew up in Boston, a Red Sox fan, in Game 4, going to pitch probably the most important game of his career. And I was real concerned, and I was very observant, just watching, but I just stayed out of their way because there was just so much. There was so much intensity, Ronnie. 3 and 4, there was so much intensity before those games.
Abe and Louie's is probably where you went in Boston for a good steak.
I would have to think also that, down 2-0, going to Fenway, as you say, Keith, you don't know how, Bobby O and Ronnie are going to react. I would think when Lenny hits the home run leading off the first inning against Oil Can, that had to take so much pressure off everybody else.
It did. It really ignited us. And I think that was the turning point in the whole series. It's a home run in the first inning. It's a solo home run.
Yeah.
But we'd all jumped out of our chairs and our bench seats. And it was just electrifying, and then we kept it up for the inning, and we wound up scoring 4. It just gave us the shot in the arm we needed. It was, I think that it was probably the biggest hit of the series in my book.
It's interesting, Keith, that you say that the Game 4 win got Boston's attention and not the way you guys came out in Game 3. Why is that?
Because Boston was confident. They're still up 2-1. They got 2 more games at home. I'd feel good at home if I'm up 2-1 and I got 4 and 5 at home. But Game 2, we let them know. Now, okay, geez, we just squandered a 2-love lead. Now we're even, and that just I think that was the game. That was an important game.
But you had to also figure going into Game 4, Keith, that with the depth of your rotation, having Ronnie against Al Nipper in Game 4, that you were in a much better position than the Red Sox were, right?
We had the better pitching, and that's all there is to it. They had the Cy Young and Clemens that year, and they had Hurst, and the Oil Can had a good year, but right-handers had a tough time beating us in '86. Even throughout the '80s, we were a better lineup against right-handers. We had more weapons right-handed. We were better offensively, had more speed, had more power, we just. If it had been a regular season, a 4-game series, it would have been okay. We lost the first 2 games this year. So what? We'll get the next 2 guys. But it was the World Series, and we had to have those 2 games. We had to have them.
So much of the series is boiled down to that 10th inning in Game 6, because that was just so epic. It's fun to watch all of these old games and realize again and relive again just how back and forth and how crazy that entire series was. But all that being said, I do want to talk about one aspect of Game 6, and we're going to do much more obviously on Saturday. But that game, because of its length, it ended up preempting Saturday Night Live. And after you guys won the World Series, Ron Darling, was it a cold open of SNL, Ron?
It was a very cold open.
So give us the backstory. How did you end up hooking up with SNL for that?
Well, I think because I was such a big fan of the show, I probably had been to that point maybe to 10 shows live. I just loved that show. I loved watching it live. I loved occasionally being invited to the after parties. Those were like hilarious. And so maybe that's why I was on their mind or whatever. I was just a big fan of the show. And when they asked me to do it, thank God it was a cold open, because I would have never been able to do what the people who come on the show and do the open. I would have never been able to do that. I just don't have that in me.
Was it scripted in front of you? Like, do you have cue cards in front of you?
Oh, scripted, and it was only a couple takes, thank goodness, because the third take was worse than the first take. It was awful, but it was fun to do. And then when I saw it, of course, that's the first time anyone from where I come from had seen me do something that, it's a national thing. Everyone's watching that show in those days, and it was pretty cool. I got, I'm sure Keith for his Seinfeld stuff. I mean, people come out of the woodwork when you do something that's national like that, other than baseball, and the same thing for SNL.
What year did you do, Ronnie, the whole week hosting Good Morning America? Was it Good Morning America?
Yeah, I think it was '87, and I did it the Christmas week or the holiday week, and that was fun to do. But the 2:30 wake up call, not my favorite.
You mentioned Seinfeld. I mean, we might as well, since we're on Facebook Live right now, we might as well get into the acting chops of Ron and Keith here. We started a little bit with SNL. Seinfeld, though, listen, everybody, it's amazing. We should tell the story. It's amazing how many people recognize Keith, not for Keith Hernandez, the baseball player, but for Seinfeld. Where were we? Seattle, where we were trying to get across the street from, there was like a parade going on, and the officer noticed you and said, "You're Keith Hernandez from Seinfeld," and got us through because of Seinfeld.
Right. I got
so what?
Everywhere.
Yeah. So what was for those who don't know, what was the backstory of you getting into Seinfeld? How did that come about?
Everybody should know that story. I mean, Jerry was a Brooklyn guy, a Met fan. I was his favorite player. He conceived the show. Larry David was a Yankee fan, baseball fan. So they collaborated for the boyfriend episode. And ironically, they didn't know how to get a hold of me. And I don't know why they didn't call the Mets. This is my second year of retirement. And I get a call from Scott Boras, who was my last agent. They called Scott Boras, and but anyway, it was just, I got the phone call from Scott on Thursday. They were going to start to shoot the episode on Monday. If I agreed. Scott, I didn't watch prime time because of night. We play night games, so I didn't know what Seinfeld was. It was it was the second year of the show, and he said, "The Seinfeld show." I go, "What's that?" He goes, "It's a sitcom." And I said, "Oh, okay, I'll do it." And they FedExed on Friday the script to me, and I thought I was going to have minimal lines, and I realized that I'm the guest star. And to make a long story short, I had a lot of lines, and I'm panicking. And I'm going to get on an airplane on Saturday and fly to LA and be there the whole week. So I called Marsha Mason, who I had become friendly with in New York, up at Elaine's, the really lovely actress. And I asked her, I got Marsha, I got a pile of lines. What do I do? So she just said, memorize line 1, then do line 1, line 2, then line 1, line 2, line 3, and she was, make sure when you go to bed, do your scene. And so, because it'll stick in your brain, and get up in the morning, do it first thing in the morning. And it seemed to work. I memorized everybody's lines. So the first scene was the most people I worked with. So when I met Jerry and the Chucker and all the three of them in the gym, and that's the scene that they changed the most. So I knew everybody's lines, so I knew when it was my turn. And really, I was looking right at them, but I was like I was deaf. I didn't hear a word coming out of it. I just, I gotta know my line. When they're done, it's my turn. Jerry's done, I gotta say this. And I didn't want to screw it up, and I knew on Tuesday that they after Saturday when we're done, they get Sunday off, then they're gonna go Monday for a whole another week of rehearsal for the next episode. So I realized I couldn't hold up production here. So it was very intense, and I wound up spending an extra week in Los Angeles. I stayed at the Shutters, Ronnie.
Nice.
For a whole week. I got the best room at Shutters and stayed an extra week, and I just chilled out and relaxed. I was just so tense, and we finally finished. It's like the weight of the world was off my shoulders. It's a lot of lines.
It was a lot of lines. I would love to ask Gary about an acting appearance. Unfortunately, I don't believe there's one on the resume. So really quickly, before we move past this, we do have a fan question from Colleen, who wants to know about another Ron Darling acting experience, Shallow Hal.
Yes.
Well, one, it's not only that Keith was in the Seinfeld show, but it's, of all the shows, Seinfeld shows, if there's a top 3, it might be the greatest show that they had. So that is amazing. And how it happened for me is that the Farrelly brothers, people who watch comedies know them. They've done a lot of great movies. In fact, Peter Farrelly, I think, just won an Oscar for Green Book a couple of years ago. But they had decided to do this movie. And one of the characters was a big Hawaiian guy that they had found selling pineapples on the side of the street in the Big Island. And they both got together one night and they're having a beer, and they said, okay, each character, there's kind of a big guy and a smaller guy, or a bigger girl and a smaller girl. And they said, who do we know that kind of is a smaller Hawaiian. I mean, literally, this is what they told me. And they said, well, that Ronnie, they're both from Rhode Island. So it's like that Ronnie Dowling guy from the Mets. I think he's a Hawaiian dude. So I ended up getting a call from them. I was living in LA. They flew me to North Carolina. I got there on a red eye at 6:30 in the morning. I was in my trailer from 6:30 in the morning to 11:30 at night. 11:30, they called me to the set. I did that scene from 11:30 to 11:45. It was done. And what was the coolest thing about the Fairley Brothers movie set, and I didn't know this until then, if there's a newbie, a person that's never done their lines before, never been in a movie before, as soon as you get your part done, the entire crew and cast comes onto the set and gives you a standing O. It was the coolest thing ever for my less than 1 minute on air.
And you were there at 6:30 because you just had no idea when, they didn't tell you when the scene was going to be shot?
Yeah, my call time was 7 a.m. So I was there, and I read a lot, slept a lot, and I mean, I didn't have any lines, so it was cool.
It's a lot of hurry up and wait.
That's right.
Gosh,
So true.
almighty.
So true.
All right, guys. Once again, Beyond the Booth Live is brought to you by Citi. Citi is working with Lyft to give a free annual Citi Bike membership to eligible critical workers in New York City. Learn more at citybikenyc.com/hero bikes. Gary, you still with us?
I'm still here.
Yes. Okay, great. So 21 years ago on Wednesday, Robin Ventura hit grand slams in both games of a doubleheader against the Brewers at Shea Stadium. Ventura as a whole, what type of a player was he, and what did he bring to those late 90s, early 2000s teams?
Well, he was the consummate player. I mean, he was a great Gold Glove third baseman. His last couple of years with the White Sox, his numbers decreased a little bit, and I think a lot of people were skeptical when the Mets signed him as a free agent. But it turned out his first year with the Mets in 1999, he had the best year of his career. OPS over 900 that year, drove in 120 runs, got every manner of big hits, and I think he finished 6th in the MVP balloting that year, and that turned out to be by far his best year for the Mets. The next 2 years, he had some injury issues and didn't put up quite the same kind of numbers, but his presence on that team was huge. I mean, if you know Robin, you know he is the most laid back, just calm guy that there is. And there was something about his presence that seemed to make everybody else around him better. You know, the Mets had a lot of good players on that team. Obviously, Piazza was the big star, and Alfonso and Olerud. But Robin got the attention of everybody in that clubhouse. He brought it every day. He seemed to do everything right. He conducted himself the right way. He had a great sense of humor. He just drew people in not an overbearing way, but just in a friendly, dogged way. I'm not 100% sure how to describe it, but he was just the perfect person for that team, which, you know, Bobby Valentine's teams had factions. That was always the way Bobby played it. But Robin was a guy who didn't belong to a faction. He was the guy who everybody gravitated to, and really was an important piece for those teams.
Well, Gary is a perfect example of that. The infamous rain delay gag on Piazza, where, you know, I mean, it's a little moment, but it's things like that and guys like that that we know are so critical to teams and clubhouse chemistry.
You know, when Robin first came out in Piazza's uniform with the mustache and everything, we didn't 100% know who it was and what was going on. But as soon as he stepped into the phantom batter's box on the tarp, and you knew that it was Robin, because it couldn't have been anybody else. And he just knew the right tone to set at every given time, and that's really just who Robin was.
You know, I got a quick Robin Ventura story. The first time I worked really in television in the postseason was 2000, the Subway Series, and I had the losers clubhouse after the game was done, and I went into the Mets clubhouse, and of course, silent like most losing clubhouses were, and looked around. And my job was to get some sound, you know, to talk to somebody, interview someone. how they felt about this series, whatever. Had no idea what I was doing. But as I stood there and didn't know who to ask or what question to ask, Robin Ventura looked at me and said, "Hey, Ronnie, you need 45 seconds?" I said, "I do." He said, "Come on." And I went over, and I don't know what I asked him, but he answered it, and it covered 45 seconds, and that's all I needed to send to Fox. That's the kind of guy that Robin Ventura is.
And I'll add one thing. I always observe players, and I always say, that guy, I'd like to have him as a teammate. I'd like to have played with him. That to me is the ultimate compliment that one player can make to another. And that's what when I saw Robin, and he had that sense of humor, and he would have fit in perfectly in any one of those 17 teams I played for.
And you talk about the 2 Grand Slams. That was kind of Robin's calling card. He used to always talk about batting with the bases loaded, and he had a tremendous amount of success. And, you know, he had, I think it was 13 Grand Slams in his career, and then the one that didn't count in the postseason.
That's right. That's right.
But he always talked about how when the bases are loaded, the pitcher's in trouble.
Right.
I'm not in trouble. And it just, for some reason, it always struck me that he just got it. He had that great calm demeanor, which really served him well in those circumstances.
Well, guys, as long as we're doing on this date discussions, it's been 39 years now, Ron, since the anniversary of that just famous Yale St. John's pitchers duel between you and Frank Viola. What was it? Both starters 11 scoreless innings, and you didn't allow your first hit until the 12th, right?
Yeah, I'm famous for a game I lost 1-0. I don't know what that says about me, but it was an incredible game. Really quickly, Frank Viola and that team, I think he was 11-0 that year. John Franco was 10-0 as starters. I think their record was 55-3. We really thought, we just did not want to get embarrassed to the powerhouse St. John's team. And, I had one of those days. And thank goodness I was so lucky that Roger Angel attended, a great writer from the New Yorker. And he was sitting with Smokey Joe Wood, and he turned it into a short story called "The Web of the Game" about that game. And I'm not saying that because I pitched it. If you love baseball and want to read a great baseball story, because even though I threw 11 no-hit innings, it's not really about that. It's about Smokey Joe Wood. It's about how baseball, the web of the game, brings everyone together, kind of a 6 degrees of separation thing. I would read that. It's amazing.
I actually never seen any video from that game until just yesterday. There was a clip floating around about 1 minute and 20 seconds of a couple of your pitches and a couple of Violas, and then the game-winning play, the delayed double steal when when St. John scored their run in the 12th. And then there was a little video clip with you talking about the play, and you said, "I threw a slider, I kind of fell off. Nobody yelled that the runner was going. I was supposed to cut the ball off at the mound, but I wasn't aware, and so the throw went through and the winning run scored." I had never known that story before.
Well, I was aware, but I had fallen off the mound, and I couldn't get in position to catch the ball. I needed the catcher to wait a beat, and he was a rookie catcher that had replaced, and he was a fantastic player, ended up becoming a great player at Yale. But he didn't wait that beat, so he threw it right where I was supposed to be, but I wasn't there yet. Went over my head and went to one of my best friends, the second baseman, Jeremy Spear, and we started this discussion with a rundown, and they will end it close with a rundown. That never happened as St. John scored their run.
Well, Ronnie, one last thing on that, because Gary brought up the exact same thing that I was going to say, that I had never seen any footage, and I saw that exact same clip.
Yeah.
And to me, what stood out about your interview was you mentioned that the crowd noise didn't allow you to hear that the runner was going. And the reason that struck me is because you think, a college baseball game, even though you guys were such big prospects, there's not usually a great atmosphere. What was the atmosphere like on that day, and how different from any other college game you'd been a part of?
Well, it would be different today because of the social media, but New Haven, even though it's a Yale is in New Haven, it's a New Haven town. I don't know how else to describe it. There's a lot of folks that have been in that town for a long, long time. And when word got out that there was this game going on, that was really something special. After about the fourth or fifth inning, that place filled up, and it probably 3,500, 4,000 people. It's one of the most beautiful old ballparks you'll ever see, with the wood slat seats and the big monster in center field that Babe Ruth apparently hit a home run over in 27. You know, George Herbert Walker Bush was the first baseman and captain there one year. There's a lot of history, of course. There was a seat behind home plate that they had to take the iron out of the middle to make it a double seat, because William Howard Taft used to always love to come and watch the games, and his backside was a little too big for one seat, so he needed for two. But it was packed by the end, and a lot of it was because there were a lot of scouts there for not only Frankie but for myself.
I don't want to finish this conversation without giving credit to Adam, who on Facebook actually asked about this a few weeks ago on Facebook. So Adam, thanks for the waiting on the response, but I hope it was worth your time. Also want to announce that next week on SNY, as we continue airing these old games, we will air the 2015 NLDS between the Mets and the Dodgers. Such a great series.
Wow.
Keith, overall, what are your recollections from that series, Mets Dodgers, just a few years ago?
Well, there was Murphy, what he did, the home runs off of Kershaw. I mean, this Murphy was basically a line drive hitter for how long? And all of a sudden he found the new pop, started pulling the ball more. And he had a phenomenal playoff. Remember, Cespedes carried them there in the second half, but Cespedes really wasn't that much of a factor in the postseason, if I remember correctly. He didn't play poorly, but he wasn't prominent. It was Murph who got the big hits and off left-handers. So that's what I recall out of that series. I was just amazed when Murph hit that home run. I'm going, come on, what's going on here? This is what you dream of when you're a little boy in Little League, which kind of postseason you want to have. It was just incredibly electrifying.
Yeah, and not against anybody, either. As Keith's mentioning, Kershaw and Greinke were two of the three Cy Young finalists that season. Greinke had a 1.66 ERA that year.
Yep.
Right.
And it wasn't just the home runs. It was that incredible play that he made in Game 5 with the Dodgers at the shift. He's on first base. There's a walk, and he just doesn't stop at second base and takes the extra base, scores on the sacrifice fly, and that ends up being the difference in the game. And
right.
Murph was he did not do anything wrong in that series or the series against the Cubs, and hitting home runs in six straight postseason games. Just a phenomenal for anybody, but even more so for a guy who had not to that point been that kind of home run hitter.
And the guys he hit it off, like Keith was saying, Kershaw and Greinke and Arrieta and Lester and on and on and on.
Yeah.
What I remember from that series, DeGrom, of course, the two starts, second one just grinded it out. I remember this is kind of early in exit velo, but I remember that Conforto hit one off the right field foul pole, 115 miles an hour off Greinke. I'll never forget that home run as long as I live. And the final was, I remember I was doing that series, and I was in Terry Collins' office before the game, and he would always give me something to look for in the game. And as I was leaving, he pulled me on the side and he said, I wouldn't be surprised if the big fella is in this game. And he met Syndergaard. And he came in that game and throwing 100 miles an hour in probably the most important relief role of his career.
Seventh inning of that game after DeGrom went 6, and then Familiar for 6 outs. And what I remember watching it on television from our studios in New York was Utley, who I think led off the 9th inning. And when Utley connected, I thought the ball was going. I don't know if it looked like that in the ballpark,
it
but
did.
you thought
It did.
That's a game-tying home run, but it just died and didn't go anywhere.
Well, it's one of those few Dodger Stadium. I mean, it doesn't happen anymore, but it used to happen when Keith and I played, that you'd square one up, but the ball would die in that marine layer.
And of course, that's the other thing that you remember out of that series was Utley breaking Tejada's leg, the reaction to Utley when the Dodgers came back to Citi Field, and that whole thing, which led to the rule we now have for slides at second base.
And I always like to take people into the area that they can't be. I mean, everybody, you guys just talked about all the things that I think most people think about when they talk about that particular series. But, I will never forget after that Tejada Utley incident, being in the clubhouse after the game, and you want to talk about real anger and teammates really caring. Michael Kadire, when we were interviewing him, you couldn't see this on camera, but his hand was in a closed fist and was shaking uncontrollably as he was talking about Chase Utley. And I remember that being the one thing that stood out to me. And, David even, he's a pretty diplomatic guy, and he had as strong a reaction to that as I think I had ever heard from him. So it was being in the clubhouse and sensing that real raw anger in a way that you really don't see that often.
Something, I'll just add one thing. It's always great, even in football, when you got a wild card team that knocks off the big boys to get to the big dance, and it's always fun. It's like David and Goliath, and that certainly it was the mighty Cubs and it was the Dodgers, and it was incredibly fun to watch.
And it is amazing to think back on the pitching. I know the Mets had the pitching, but the pitching that they beat, and we mentioned Greinke and Kershaw, Arrieta won the Cy Young that year. Kershaw had a 2.13, Greinke had a 1.66, and they both lost the Cy Young to Arrieta. So it was one of the great Cy Young years ever, probably, in the NL.
Yeah.
And the Mets, had to go through all of them to get to the World Series.
I think a lot of the Met players that are still here that were on that team, I think that team came of age that postseason. They didn't know going in, and I think they got the confidence from that postseason getting to the World Series, even though they fell short. I think that kind of made the team what it is today.
All right, once again, Beyond the Booth Live, brought to you by Citi. Citi is working with Lyft to give a free annual Citi Bike membership to eligible critical workers in New York City. Learn more at citybikenyc.com/hero bikes. Fellas, as always, we're going to end this with some Q&A from the fans. Patrick wants to know what you guys think of a universal DH. Gary?
Well, I think that the DH is an abomination, and I hope that if we use it for this shortened season in 2020, that we don't necessarily use it forever. But the Mets are positioned perfectly to take advantage of a universal DH this particular season. Obviously Cespedes looked great with the bat in spring. Don't know how much he could play the field, but it certainly relieves that stress if Cespedes can be your DH. You've got J.D. Davis, who is certainly primed to be a DH. You've got Robinson Cano, who could certainly use the days off from playing second base, so you can use the DH. You got Dom Smith. You can use Pete Alonso occasionally. There's all sorts of options for the Mets, and they probably are in the best situation of any National League team to take advantage of the DH, but please, not forever.
There's a lot of things that they're going to try. I believe that 2019 will be the last year that you'll ever see pitchers hitting in the National League. That will be forever gone after this year.
Well, I'm going to write my congressman and my senator.
You are.
So what you're saying, Ronnie, is that if Bartolo Colon gets his wish and makes his comeback at age 47 with the Mets, he won't get to bat. Is that what you're saying?
He'll pinch hit. He'll pinch hit in a big blowout, Gary.
I will tell you this: the pitchers on the Mets staff will be furious if they don't get to hit.
Yeah, they can hit.
They can hit, and they love hitting.
Yeah.
Jake wants to hit. Noah wants to hit. Matz wants to hit. These guys love hitting. If this is permanent, they will. They'll be right behind you, Keith. One last question, guys, and then we're going to go.
Okay.
We've touched on this a little bit in the past, but it is. It's even interesting for me to hear from Gary specifically about preparation. Steven wants to know and I promise it's not me, Steven, asking this question, but he wants to know what kind of preparation you do before a game in a series. And he takes it a step further by asking how much is done by the production staff and how much is driven by what you feel you want to point out.
Well, I think the beauty of our broadcast is that we never know what we're going to talk about. And so my inclination on a daily basis during the season is to try to know as much as I can about everything going on in the sport. And I think these guys feel the same way. It's changed so much in the 30 odd years since I started because of the availability of information. I mean, when I first started in the big leagues in 1989, your prime sources of information were USA Today and CNN headline news. I mean, there was no internet, and you really didn't have the wealth of information available. You tended to make more phone calls, talk to people in other cities, find stuff out. But now I could literally spend 24 hours every day preparing for the game. And it's more a matter of what to ignore rather than what you read. But I think that the nature of our broadcast is such that every day we're trying to find out as much as we can. To me, it's more about the sport globally because, we play the teams that we play. You prepare for the first game of a series, but you see these teams a lot. You know what's going on, and we see the Mets every day. It's more knowing what happened in Oakland last night and what the reaction to that was, because if it comes up during the broadcast, we're knowledgeable to talk about it. But it's, the nature of it is that any given day, we could be talking about something that I learned this morning, last week, 10 years ago, or when I was 6 years old. And that's the way baseball is. It changes every day, but the history of it all coalesces into one whole. And that's kind of how all three of us approach it.
Well, I know.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Keith.
They make such a big deal about my scorecard because I do all the colors and all that. But I think that we should show Gary's scorecard, and he guards it jealous, folks. When he has to go eat, he folds very precisely his scorecard. He puts things on top, and they're very precise. And if you go in there and take a look and something's just one little, maybe half a degree off, Gary knows. Who's been in my papers? Who's looking at my scorecard? But he writes so fine, and I watch him out of the corner of my eye because Gary is in the middle. Is he in the middle?
In the left.
It's been so long. You're wayward. So I have to look in the corner of my eye.
You won't be able to do that anymore, by the way, Keith. We'll be socially distancing in the booth.
We're going to have social distancing on the broadcast, but Gary has all this stuff, and it's all over. And certain thing will come up, and he'll go right to it. And I kind of keep my eye on because I always try to get little tips what Gary does. But Gary has so much more responsibility than us. I have to really be focused on in-game analysis, and I have certain statistics that I focus on, like I'm sure you do, Ron.
Yeah, Steve, and to put the production crew, Greg Picker and his production people, sometimes we get too close to it, and I think Greg and the people in the truck, they'll bring up stuff when we have dinner that will go, whoa, I never even thought about that. Yeah, we definitely have to talk about that. And second, I think what Greg and his truck, they do greatly is that, the way the world works, Gary was explaining the internet and social media, is that a story might come out at 7 o'clock in the morning. By the time we are going to be on air, it has been exhausted with every single opinion you could ever have. And I know Greg always pushes us to take a different view, a unique view than what has been said by everyone else.
And one more thing about Gary. He's very sympathetic about his companion, his colleagues' scorecards. If you spill coffee or water or Coke or tea over your scorecard, Gary's like, oh, it's like the worst thing could ever possibly happen. So I always get a kick out.
I'm very quick with the paper towels, Keith.
Well, guys, this was I'd say a 90 8 out of 100. I'm a little upset that we got almost a full hour and nobody mentioned my haircut.
I was just about to go there. I got to look at the video of Julie cutting your hair, which I understand was edited down significantly.
Big time. Sped up very fast. You had to take the audio out.
Did she buzz cut your hairline?
Right up in here, Keith? Right around
Well, look
here?
at mine. My mind's going too.
I can't say
If you
anything.
would not have sped up that video, it would have been me just. If you wouldn't have sped up the video, it would have been me just constantly saying, "What? Where? What are you going?
Oh.
What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing?" So,
See,
but Keith,
you haven't been married long enough. Micromanaging that, you cannot do that, my friend. Just let it go. Let it be.
Yeah.
One more thing, Steve, since you brought up appearances, I understand that your shutdown workout physique is at a high ebb.
hey, I've got crazy abs now, and
Really?
Men's Health magazine. Maybe I have crazy abs, or maybe I lost a bet on Baseball Night in New York and was forced to tweet something to Men's Health magazine about my physique. I am not going to say which one it was.
I'm just impressed that Men's Health magazine actually responded.
They did reply. They said pick or it didn't happen, and there's no pick coming their way. All right, that is Beyond the Blue Live.
You can use mine, Steve, anytime.
We'll negotiate that after this is over. For Gary, Keith, Ron, I'm Steve. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you guys next week. Stay safe.